Alright, so I'm going to do two examples on how to factor by grouping. This usually is our method when we have four terms, and we can pull out common factors for two of the terms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group the first equation, 2d cubed plus 10d squared plus 3d plus 15. I see here that 3d and 15 have a common factor of 3, and if I look at 2d cubed and 10d squared, we have a common factor of 2d squared. So we're going to group them. 2d cubed plus 10d squared plus 3d plus 15. So we're going to take out the greatest common factor in this one, which is 2d squared. And when I factor out the 2d squared, I get d plus 5. And my GCF on this one, my greatest common factor here is 3. So when I factor out that 3, I get d plus 5. Now when I look at my equation, I have another common factor. Now we're not used to the common factor being a binomial, but in this case it is. So there's a d plus 5 in each term. So my GCF is d plus 5, so I'm going to factor that out. And if I take out the d plus 5, what's left is the 2d squared plus 3. Now, notice I'm factoring out the d plus 5. It's not d plus 5 squared, and if I multiply this back out to check my answer, we end up with 2d cubed. First terms, I get 3d plus 3d plus 10d squared plus 15. So when I write that in order, I get 2d cubed plus 10d squared plus 3d plus 15, which is exactly what I started with. So my final answer is the d plus 5 times d squared, or 2d squared, plus 3. That is my final factorization of the problem we started with. Let's look at this next one. It's a little bit different because of the negative signs. This one was all positive. When I group this, it's really important that I group that negative 9 into the problem. Now we're going to group the problem x cubed minus 6x squared will group, and then we're going to add a plus, and we're going to group the negative inside the parentheses with the 54, so that when we factor out the GCF we get the same thing in the parentheses. So my GCF is x squared here, so x squared times x minus 6, and my GCF on this one is negative 9, so I get plus negative 9 x minus 6. So now I have another common factor. My GCF is x minus 6. So I take that out, and what I'm left with is x squared minus 9. At this point, if you multiplied it back out, you would get what you started with, but it's not completely factored because this is a difference of squares, so that's x minus 3, x plus 3 times the x minus 6. It's not completely factored if you have a binomial that can be factored more. So there's the final answer, x minus 6 times x minus 3 times x plus 3.